Good afternoon. Welcome to the Midday Mull for Monday, the 20th of October. Seems like today winter's back with a vengeance, but God's word still warms our hearts and lives, so let's look at that. Today we read 2 Thessalonians chapter 1, and as Paul writes to them, he says in verse 3, "We ought always to thank God for you, brothers and sisters, and rightly so, because your faith is growing more and more, and the love all of you have for one another is increasing." And one thing is, what a beautiful picture of a church where faith is growing and love is increasing. All those things that Jesus commanded the people are doing. And so the Thessalonian church is doing well. And our prayer is, Lord, would that our church would be like that as well. But then in verse 4, he continues, "Therefore, among God's churches, we boast about your perseverance and faith in all the persecutions and trials you are enduring." And as I read that, those two verses in my mind don't go together, because your perseverance and faith in the persecutions and trials. And as I reflected on that, I thought, so often we think that God grows us and that things are positive and that life is good when we are at ease, essentially, when things are smooth and there's no problems. For the Thessalonian church, that wasn't the case. It wasn't that they had a successful ministry and everybody loved them and they had a big church in the middle of the square and the surrounding politicians and others all sort of invited them to dinner. No, they were under threat. There was persecution against them. They were not well loved by the rest of the community. But despite the fact that they had to persevere and their faith had to be tested in the persecutions and trials, in that situation, Paul says, your faith is growing and your love you have for one another is increasing. In the midst of the problems, their faith and their love were growing. God was working among them. And for me, that is an encouragement that when we're struggling, God can still be there. We sometimes think that when we're facing difficulties, the growth has stopped until those difficulties are past. And Scripture says, no, it's in those difficulties that the growth happens. And I'm not praying that the church would be persecuted or that we'd have problems. But I think my prayer is that we'd lift our eyes and see that despite our situation, we can still be growing. God can still be working as a body, but also in our individual lives, that we sometimes put off doing things until everything's settled down. And sometimes God says, no, before it settles down, come to me, pray to me, read my word, get involved in worship while you're in the middle of the struggles, because that's where I'm going to grow your faith and increase your love. So be encouraged by that thought, that if our lives are going well, wonderful, but if they're not, that God is still there. God does still work. We can still rely on him. And in every situation, we are blessed.